As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. The Lord has been too good to me. He has brought me out too many times. He has just done too much for me not to serve him. And I will serve the Lord for the rest of my days because he is worthy. He's worthy of all the glory and all the honor. And he's worthy for me to just give my life because he gave his only begotten son for me. And not only that, outside of Jesus coming and dying and providing salvation, God is just a present help. He's there every step of the way. Not to say that there's not going to be struggles or hard times, but whatever the struggle or the hard time is, I think I said this last week, God is right there in the midst of it with you and he carries you through it. And that's something that we have to always remember because we're living in some tough times and the Bible speaks of a great falling away where people are turning their backs on God. But when you look at this, you may have been hurt in the church. It could have been a pastor or a missionary or a teacher or whomever, but you can't look at that. Look at God. There has never been a time in my life where God has let me down. So we have to be careful not to turn our backs on God because of what someone else did to us. We should serve God in times where you feel discouraged, in times where you feel fearful and you want to give up. Look back over your life and look at all the things that God has brought you through. Look at everything that God has done for you and remember the power of the Lord. And then you will know that the way to move forward and the way to end up at that next level and go higher is to serve the Lord. Once again, thank you so much for joining me for the Sanctuary Sunday School. I am so glad to have you here with me. This week's subject is love and serve God, and it comes from the book of Joshua. Now we look at Joshua. Joshua is a powerful leader for the Lord, and I love the story of Joshua because before Joshua rose to power, he was a minister and he was faithful under Moses. And when you look at this, and as we look at churches today that are trying to make transitions of power, we need those Joshuas in that church that's there. And Joshua didn't just become faithful once he took over. He was dependable and he was right there with Moses and he stood with Moses. And so we talked about last week in the book of Deuteronomy where Moses was reiterating the law and letting them know, hey, you still need to do this even though that I'm not with you. And we see that Joshua picked up the mantle right where Moses left off. And he was telling them, he started to talk to them about what God had done for them and how he had brought them out and how God had been with them consistently. Now, we're moving pretty fast through the Old Testament because now we're at the point where they're already through Egypt. So remember, back to Abraham, God had promised Abraham how his seed would multiply. And it's already done that because remember, they were in Egypt and they were not taken captive into Egypt. We studied about Joseph, who was Jacob and Rachel's son. And we talked about Joseph, that same Joseph, he grew up and he became a ruler in Egypt. And that's how the children of Israel got down in Egypt. And while they were there, they multiplied just exceedingly. And it was so many of them. And that's where we have the book of Exodus, where they came out, that they made that mass exodus out of Egypt. And God kept them through all of that and brought them through the wilderness to the promised land. Now, this promised land that they inhabited, the land of Canaan, was not empty. There were people living there and they literally had to fight their way through that land. And Joshua was a great warrior and he was just fighting through that land and they took possession of that land. And so this is where they are. And Joshua, he told the people and he's reiterating to them that we've got to obey the Lord and we got to remember God has been with us all the way since on the other side of the flood, all the way before we got to Egypt. And he's been with us from Abraham and even Abraham's father. And he's been with us all of this time. And now he has brought us, he is fulfilling this promise that he made to our fathers, Abraham. And he's brought us into this land that you didn't even work for, houses that you didn't even build. You're eating fruit that you didn't even plant. God has let these Canaanites and these Amorites build this land and put this stuff here for them. And then he drove them out and allowed you to walk in and enjoy. And so this is what Joshua had to remind them of. And he also mentions the idol gods. And we've seen this thread of idolatry throughout the Old Testament because God was holding his children to a standard of righteousness. And what is the first commandment? Thou shalt have no, I am the Lord thy God, and thou shalt have no other God before me. But a lot of the nations surrounding them were heathen nations. And as they would intermingle with them and associate with them, they started picking up practices of idolatry. And that was angering God, which is why they had to go through so many trouble, so much trouble, as we're going to see as we go through the Old Testament. It's going to say, and again, the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord. They say it over and over again. So Joshua was reminding them, you're God's people, and all of these things that God has done for you. And so you need to serve the Lord. And he told them, he said, now, if it seems evil unto you to serve the Lord, he said, you need to choose what you're going to do. Because see, there's one thing about it. If you don't make the decision, God is going to make the decision for you. And I think that's a point that a lot of us miss today. We want to claim the Lord and we want to claim holiness and we want to have that form and we want to have that function and not really live right. And God is rejecting all of that. It is either you're for the Lord or you're not for the Lord. Either you are a servant or you are against him. There is no middle ground, and we can't play with God. And this is what Joshua was telling them. So you need to make up your mind what you're going to do, is how he put it. Are you going to serve the Lord or are you not going to serve the Lord? And I'm your leader and I'm teaching you what is right and I'm teaching you to uphold the law. But you have to make your decision on your own and I can't make you do that. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. And you know, as a spiritual leader, I've gone through some struggles, and I'm sure that if you're a teacher or a pastor or a preacher or anything, you've had this where you're teaching and you're trying to get people to do right, and it's frustrating and you're struggling, and every time you think you have somebody you can count on, and somebody that's going to do right, they let you down, and you start going through this struggle. But here's what I learned: don't struggle, don't labor with people, just live right. Just do right. Make the declaration that Joshua made. As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. And once you do that, there is always going to be a witness. The scripture says that they made their declaration and they committed to serve the Lord. Yes, there's always going to be some people who are not going to do right. That's okay. There's always enough. There's somebody that's going to stand with you and stand for God. And those are the people that matter. That's your tribe. And the easiest way for us to convert those who aren't following Christ or following the Lord or serving the Lord is to be an example. Show them. You don't have to fight with them. You don't have to argue with them. You don't have to struggle with them. Just keep living. Just keep living. Just keep being blessed. Just keep serving the Lord. And they will have to recognize the Lord in you. It's in your best interest to make the decision, make the declaration that as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. And we are living in a time where, and I've said this over and over again, the laws are changing. The world is changing. And even I have an 18-year-old, man, it's difficult because her teachers are telling her this stuff is okay, and her peers are doing it, and she's saying, "Mom, you the only one that have these rules." I say, "These not my rules; these are God rules." And again, as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. I don't care what your friends doing. I don't care what their mamas say. We're going to serve the Lord in His house, and we're living in a day where we have to take that stand. And sometimes it's not easy, but I guarantee you that through the power of the Lord, you can stand and you can do it. Greater is He that is in me than he that is in the world. There is no power of the earth. There is no power of Satan that is greater than the power of God. And if you can just make that declaration that you are going to love and serve the Lord. See, you serve the Lord out of love, out of gratitude, out of appreciation. Yes, God, I will go. Yes, God, I will do it because I love you and I'm grateful and I just love what you've done for me. I appreciate everything that you've given me. And yes, I am going to serve you. Servants, being a servant indicates ownership. I am a servant of the Lord. I belong to the Lord. I am His and He is mine. That's who I identify with. You don't have to call me nothing. You don't have to call me missionary, sister. You can just call me Val, but just make sure that you know that I am a child of God. And that is what the most important thing is. And in this lesson, the children of Israel were at a very critical point because they were at the point where they were possessing the promise of God. Think about that. They were at the point of possessing the promise of God. So at that point, if you want to possess the promise of God, then you have to submit to serve God. I'm going to say that again. If you want to possess the promise of God, you have to commit to serve God. The enemy comes in and he tricks you and he tries to make you stop short of God's will and God's of serving him. But when you stop short of God's will, you stop short of his blessings. So we want you to make a commitment today that as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord.